Well, let's get more on this story. Joining us live from Perth in Australia is Alexey Muraviev. He's an Associate Professor of National Security and Strategic Studies at Curtin University. Thanks for joining us on the News Hour. So the big question, will Russia agree to a ceasefire?
Well, it would very much depend on what the United States would offer the Russians. And that's the paradox of the situation, because clearly the Americans applied enormous pressure on the Ukrainians for them to agree to the conditions of the ceasefire, because the terms to which Ukrainians agreed to is nothing to what they were initially discussing and arguing for or against. With the situation, in the situation with Russia, it's different because the agenda for the US-Russia talks is so much broader than Ukraine. And obviously, Trump understands that he needs to talk to the Russians about an array of things, ranging from strategic nuclear missile reduction to the Arctic, to the space cooperation, to its relationship with China, Iran, North Korea. The list goes on, and it seems to be endless. And for that matter, the Americans cannot really pressure Russia too much, because they fear one important element is this growing synergy between Russia and China. And because the Russians been under sanctions and now they're winning on the battlefields of Ukraine, the list of options of bargaining chips against them is actually look really minimal. So in this sense, it's more about what the Americans can give the Russians as a form of incentive for the Russians to agree to the terms of the ceasefire, given the fact that they hold the upper hand on the battlefield, and there is not much else to bargain with.
So a bit of carrot rather than stick, if you will. I suppose it is a big if, but if the Russians did agree to a ceasefire, how could they be made to abide by it? Because I think there'd be huge concern in Ukraine, but perhaps in Europe more widely, that they might agree to one thing and then simply do something else, as they have been known to do before.
This is an excellent question, and it's also something that actually is widely discussed in Russia itself, but vis-a-vis the Ukrainians. So the big question is, all right, the two sides agree to a ceasefire, but who will observe the conditions, the provisions of the ceasefire? Who will ensure that no side violates any provisions of the ceasefire, or in case of an accusation of finger pointing, things can be verified and the perpetrator can be identified, and whatever action needs to be taken. So I think there is a lot of ambiguity. You know, it's easy to say, let's just stop fighting, but given the level of animosity and given the sheer length of the front line and all other factors, some of which I have already detailed, actually achieving the process, making it real and making it as something that can happen sooner than later is an enormous task. So at this point in time, it's more about discussing in principle whether Russia is in principle willing to negotiate the ceasefire, because they keep insisting on the permanent seizure of activities and the transition to peace rather than something temporary. I think that would be the key challenge for the US diplomats. And it would very much depend on what sort of tactic would they approach. Will it be the carrot, or they will try to combine carrot with a bit of a whip? And then, you know, you never know what sort of reaction you can expect from Putin, because again, Putin showed to be a man of unpredictable action. So we can also expect some unforeseen surprise from his side as well.
Absolutely. Okay, Alexey Muraviev from Perth in Australia, thank you so much for your insight.